Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you can join me here today and I hope you find today's session useful and beneficial. If you look at an average life, a human being lives about 80 years. And if you try and calculate how many weeks that is, 80 times 52 weeks in a year gives you 4,160 weeks. That's all we have, 4,160 weeks. And if you round that off, that's roughly 4,000 weeks, which is the name of the book, the title of the book I recently read that I found a very powerful reminder. And that book is 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. This is this one here. This is was a very interesting read because I've read a lot of books about productivity and how to make the most out of your time, and this book was very different. All the other books tell you how to make the most of your time, to do everything you want in the least amount of time possible, so that you can jam pack your life and your time as much as you want. But this book was very different. What it told me was I need to take a break and stop and realize what's the most important thing in my life. Now, Oliver Burkeman gives an analogy, which I'll try and explain here. So just to make this more of a useful thing that you can visualize. So he says, imagine you have a professor who's in a class. He's giving a lecture to his students, and he has a big jar in front of him, and he has rocks. He has massive stones, big rocks, tiny pebbles, and he has some coffee. And he tells his students, okay, I want you to fit all of this into the jar. So the students try, they put the small pebbles first, and then they put the coffee after, and then they put the big pebbles, big rocks, and they don't fit. And the professor's like, that's because you've got it all wrong. What you do first is you put the big rocks in, which is the biggest items, and then you put the pebbles, which will eventually fall through because it's rocks. You have like crevices in between, and the pebbles will fall through. And when you pour the coffee will just go all the way down because it's just liquid, will just seep through. And his analogy was, in life, you make time for the big rocks first. You take care of that first, and then you take care of the pebbles, and then you take care of the water, the coffee. But Oliver Burkeman, in this book, he says that's actually a flawed analogy because you are assuming that you have a certain amount of big rocks that will fit into the jar. Let's say 5 big rocks. But actually we have 20 big rocks in our life. And there is no way possible that those 20 big rocks will ever fit in that jar. And that's his whole ethos in this book. He's trying to tell us that we have 4,000 weeks in this life. And we want to cram in so much that it's not going to be possible. It's in fact, it's impossible to be able to do so much in just the 4,000 weeks we have. We'll try and do things haphazardly. We'll try and do as much as we can, and it'll all won't be a good job at all. So instead, he's proposing for a reframe. He's proposing that we prioritize tasks. We basically make a task list. And I'll bring in Warren Buffett here. So Warren Buffett has an interesting thing. So he says, when you're looking at a task list, he said, make a list of all your goals and all the things you'd achieve in life. Make a list of 25 items. Once you've made the list, then prioritize those items in terms of highest priority first, and then the lowest priority last. So you have the first right at the top, that's the most important to you, and then the 25th would be the least important to you. And then he says, take the top 5, and those are your goals, and you focus on those goals. And that's good. So you focus on those goals. But then when I first read that, I said, okay, fine. So the remaining 20 are like second tier. So basically, when I focus on those goals, I can look at the others. When I have free time, I can look at the other 20. But do you know what Warren Buffett says? He says those are not second tier. Those are the items you want to avoid at all costs. They're part of your list, part of your goals, but you want to avoid those items at all costs because those will take you away from the top 5 that are important to you. And I thought that was really powerful. I think that's, if you look at it that way, when you have like very important things that you want to focus on, you just focus on those things and then you leave the rest because those become a distraction. There is a book called The One Thing. I think I have it here. Yeah, The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Pappson. So that's exactly the thing that The One Thing talks about, where you focus on the one thing that's so important and you leave the rest because then that's not important. Or for example, Carl Newport talks about in his book as well. He calls things deep work, that you focus on and give your attention, everything, to that deep work. And shallow work takes your attention away from deep work. So you want to narrow in that deep work and just focus on deep work, and don't let the shallow work take you away from what's more important. And Warren Buffett, in fact, goes one step further and says those 20 items you avoid at all costs. You just don't want to look at it at all. And it's important. So when I read this book, I thought, let me start journaling about this. Let me make a list of what's important to me, and then prioritize what's important, and then see what I don't want to focus on, and just look at those things that are the most important things to me. And what this does is it makes you very present and very aware. Because when I made this list, I realized actually I want to use my time effectively. If I have to choose 5 items, let's say 5 big rocks out of the 25 that I have to really think about what it is that I really, really want out of life. And that makes me take a step back, focus, think about it, and just ponder on what it is that I really want. And in a way that made me more present and more intentional about what I was doing, because whatever forms as a top 5 goals are the things that I will absolutely focus on, and the things that I won't focus on will completely disappear out of my task list, out of my goals list, because they no longer apply. And so I become more intentional about those 5 things. And I think there's more to be said about that, because then you start living in the present, living in the now, living in the moment. There's a book called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which talks about this, because then you become so intentional because you've chosen this specific goal over other goals. You've prioritized over other goals. And there's a useful quote that Oliver Burkeman states in the book, which I'll just read out to you. He says, living more fully in the present may be simply a matter of finally realizing that you never had any other option but to be here now. It's all about the present, the now. So when I focus on the goal that I'm working on, it's all about being intentional and being present and being so conscious about what I'm working on now. Now, if you look in medieval times, time was never, no one had a watch, no one had a stopwatch, no one had a clock. Time was very fluid. So they'd wake up in the morning, they'd go about plowing the lands, hunting in the forest, and do the job. And then they'd come back and then go to bed. There was no concept of 9 to 5. There was no concept of certain structures working towards a certain time limit, that you have to do this at this time, and this at this time, and this at this time, because time didn't exist that way. It's only in the modern world, in the industrial age, when time started developing, when the first clock was developed, and things took more of a structure, where you have these 9 to 5 jobs, and you have like all of this that confine us towards doing certain things. But then this takes us away from what it is that we really want in our life. It takes us away from the main goals and the main things that we want to focus in our lives, and we should be focusing, because it's important to really focus on these things, because time will, after a certain amount of time, we look back at our lives and realize that we had certain goals and aspirations, but we never got there because we got distracted by the mundane, what Carl Newport calls the shallow work. We got so distracted by shallow work that we forgot to focus on the deep work, on the big goals that we were aspiring towards, that we wanted to achieve, but we never got round to it because we're so busy focusing on the small things. And there's something important to be said here, because when you say yes to something, you are saying no to 100 other things. And that's the whole point about procrastination. Procrastination is where you basically delay doing something, either because you're lazy or because there's something more important. There's a book called Solving the Procrastination Puzzle. A really, really good book, interesting to read. But in this book, it also talks about positive procrastination, in terms of procrastination where you delay certain things because you have no choice, or because there's something more important that you need to do. So you delay it and you say, no, I'm going to procrastinate on one thing and then focus on something else while I'm doing the thing that's more important. And I think 4,000 weeks t- puts that into practice, because we have 4,000 weeks and we want to make the most of these 4,000 weeks before they get taken away from us. I'd like to read something that Oliver Burkeman talks about in one of his concluding chapters, and I'm going to end with this. And I think it's a very powerful paragraph, and I think it's useful to ponder on. So he says, the average human lifespan is absurdly, terrifyingly, insignificantly short. But that isn't a reason for unremitting despair or for living in an anxiety fueled panic about making the most of your limited time. It's a cause for relief. You get to give up on something that was always impossible. The quest to become the optimized, infinitely capable, emotionally invincible, fully independent person you're officially supposed to be. Then you get to roll up your sleeves and start work on what's gloriously possible instead. You then focus on your top 5 goals, on the deep work, on the one thing, on the things that are important to you. That's when you focus. And I think 4,000 weeks gave me that positive mindset that it doesn't matter if I've got so many things to do. I choose the things that are most important, focus on that, and do it to perfection, because that's what is required of me. That's what I want to get out of life, to do things so well that when I die after my 4,000 weeks, I'm proud to have lived a life worth living, or as Socrates called, the examined life. So I hope this has been a useful reminder, and I hope that I do encourage you to read this book, 4,000 Weeks by Oliver Burkeman. I think it's a powerful book. It's a very different book to other productivity books, which tell us to do a lot in a short amount of time. This book is more about taking a step back and focusing on what's important and what's the most important goal in our lives. So yeah, thank you for joining me today, and I hope you found this very beneficial. Until next time, see you soon.